getting ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. My name's Paul Kilduff-Taylor and I'm joined as ever by the intractable Ian Hardingham.
Hello Mr. Paul Kilduff-Taylor. I've been using virtual reality to train for this week's podcast, so you should expect a better performance from me.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
Kotaku got some hands-on time with Star Citizen last week at Gamescom. Their impression overall was very positive, saying that despite some bugs, the game is starting to come together into a cohesive whole. Now that we're starting to get an idea of what Star Citizen is actually going to be, does it seem like the sort of game that you would play, Ian Hardingham?
Yes. The things they're promising and what it looks like looks really exciting. It doesn't make me particularly less worried that they're going to get stuck trying to put too much into it and never finish it, but if they do finish it, I think it could be really awesome.
I was seriously unimpressed by the content of this article, I have to say. I don't think that this means that we're even slightly more likely to get a coherent game or experience out of this fiasco. And I want to believe, like, there's a lot of things in this that sound encouraging, that they have got the kind of core Wing Commander-y space stuff there, but I think it's just so easy to go to one of these demos and be blown away by the potential. You know, the thing that Julian Benson mentions in this article of seeing the player models get into the ships and be coherent within the ships, that sounds cool, but it also sounds like something that could have been a huge waste of time and massively derailed the important bits of the development. So I feel discouraged by this.
At least the upside's there. I think that at this point Star Citizen is all about the ridiculous details and the things that other games don't do. And there's something good that there is at least a promise of it being this completely unique thing with all of these weird features, even if it's not especially likely to be finished based on that. I mean, yeah, journalists falling in love with hands-on at a big show is quite a normal thing, and I agree with you that it doesn't, just because it's got these small little bits that are cohesive just within themselves doesn't mean it's anywhere closer to completion. This doesn't make me any more confident, like I say, or particularly more optimistic that it'll be finished, but it did remind me that the thing here that might be finished is really good.
Do you think that they had kind of undue pressure to do multiplayer with Star Citizen? Because I think a lot of the people who like this kind of thing and like Wing Commander are single-player gamers. I guess the promise of multiplayer Wing Commander is so great that you can't ignore that in this day and age.
I'd much rather they just did it just single-player. This is the kind of game that I definitely want to play single player and not have any other disgusting humans getting in the way of my experience. I don't know about undue pressure. This is a really divisive issue nowadays. Lots and lots and lots of people expect multiplayer, and that's just what they do on their evenings. They want to play games that have some social element. And a lot of the games that have become big in recent years are non-directly competitive multiplayer games, and that's what people are really attracted to now. So I can understand why they've done it. I can understand that half the world wants that sort of thing. It's not for me.
It still seems like a big shopping list of things that fans of this genre might want, and not a kind of clear creative vision. But then I suppose I'm being such a naysayer here. Like, if they're able to show segments of gameplay that are good and that are kind of exciting journalists, then that's definitely a better situation than we felt we were in a week ago.
I agree. Let's move on.
Michigan University have said that they are going to trial using VR during football training and recruitment. It's hoped that taking it off the field will reduce the risk of injury and allow for training more during the off-season. Given that it's not a player's physical ability that's being tested, what advantages does VR have over Madden for player training, Ian Hardingham?
Well, I think the primary example here is checking how good a quarterback's reading is. VR is perfect for this because it puts the quarterback in a situation that is extremely like having dropped back and reading the field and deciding when to throw the ball. I think that it's an absolutely perfect use of this technology, and I think it will actually really improve scouting of quarterbacks. And I think you can see slightly less obvious other ways that it could definitely help. The reason that I wanted to talk about this is that I'm still a little bit of a VR naysayer when it comes to games. I'm definitely cynical and a little bit pessimistic about how good traditional games can be with VR. But I think that it's important not to forget how important VR is definitely going to be in other walks of life.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think that this article in particular, we read an article on Over the Cap, and it was a bit of a hodgepodge of sort of overblown excitement with some real kind of content stuff. Like you say, being able to read the state of the game, the play field, is something that VR can work with really well. There's a quote from someone on this where they said, you don't need the free agent, you don't need them to run drills anymore because you can actually have them play the position. And that to me just shows, that's so far away from what VR can do. Maybe if you have like a Vive-like system on an entire pitch, then you could do something that was a bit like them playing the position in a game. But,
yeah, I think focusing on that is the wrong thing to do. I think this is for testing decision making, and specifically within that realm, this is going to be excellent. If you start trying to get it to be simulating the entire game, you're just going to come across the same problems that games are having. It's not appropriate for it, and you're trying to shoehorn something that's the wrong shape into the wrong shaped hole. So I agree that's not the kind of area you should be looking at. But again, the reason I brought this up was because it was one of the first times I'd seen something that I thought was genuinely completely suited to VR.
I think that first-person exploratory games are completely suited to VR, where you don't have to kind of directly interact in a very highly skill-based way with either the terrain or kind of other agents in the game. I think that genre of game is absolutely perfect for it, and given that people are kind of developing it more, it makes sense. I really feel with VR that it's absolutely the same thing as tablets. When tablets came in, everyone said, everything's going to move onto the tablet, and there's some really obvious ways in which tablets are better for certain kinds of games, and some really obvious ways in which they're worse. And I just feel like VR is another avenue like that, where it's going to have stuff that works really well, and it's going to have people trying to shoehorn stuff into it that works badly.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable comp, and another thing I'd go to would be the Wiimote. Generally, what's going to happen with these things is that a couple of new genres will arise that are perfect for the hardware, and in general, existing genres will not be better off. In general, and definitely that's not true in terms of walking simulators, which are indeed absolutely perfect for it, and I think are taking off even more than they would otherwise because of VR. So yeah, I agree. The important thing is that it's easy to get carried away with a new piece of technology, a new piece of hardware, thinking that it's going to make existing FPSs a million times better. And the truth is that it doesn't generally do that. It's usually unlocking the possibility of a new genre.
I think VR is really interesting in training as well, to bring this back to the original topic, because it really does create a kind of much more intuitive, emotional reaction to the place that you are, as opposed to doing something on a screen. So I could imagine, say, a driving simulator, or for pilot training, just for those things, like you mentioned, about awareness of your environment and reacting to something intuitively and emotionally. I think it's really good for that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're just starting to scratch the surface with that kind of stuff.
A brand new Mario 64 glitch has been discovered by a player while streaming the game. The glitch is of particular interest to speedrunners, as it could pave the way for lots of shortcuts. Unfortunately, no one yet knows how to replicate the glitch, leading another member of the community to put up a $1,000 bounty in exchange for a save file which can reliably reproduce it. Ian Hardingham, will the malign influence of the almighty dollar taint the once pure sport of speedrunning?
I love everything about this. Speedrunning is brilliant. Speedrunning is like my version of professional gaming. It's where you push all of the boundaries and you try and wring every little bit of performance or glitchiness out of a specific game. So in general, I love speedrunning already, and now you've got some crazy YouTuber offering a bounty for a bug that he's seen in a tiny clip of Mario 64. If you think about how many hours of Mario 64 there are on the internet, he's only ever seen this once. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I just love the story. I love the concept of speedrunning as being this arena in which anything goes, and they're just trying to sort of drill into games to get everything out of them.
I'm glad that we're living in the era where speedrunning has become popular as a kind of spectator sport. We're living in the area of like AGDQ and those things. I think they raised something like $1.5 million for charity. They're a really significant force now, these speedrunning communities, and they provide some great entertainment. So it's interesting to see that bug bounties are kind of coming in now, that people really are getting into these games to the extent that Mario 64 is kind of a big speedrunning game, and you know, someone who's able to master this skip is going to have a huge advantage. So it is interesting to see the financial element coming into what's been a very purist and non-financial scene.
Yeah, it just reads like the beginning of a science fiction book to me. You know, the next chapter will have some guy finding the glitch and then it turning out to be the secret code to the CIA or something. But it just seems like such a fun way that people are interacting online and money's involved and stuff. So it just really tickles me.
I don't think we're in danger yet of speedrunning becoming over-commercialised. Most of the speedrunning community stuff that I've read is just kind of soap opera bitching about what one person did or didn't say or did and didn't do at an event and so on, and whether they really got the time or they really didn't get the time. I don't think that community yet is really after those big esports dollars, so I don't think we're kind of ready for a corruption scandal just yet.
Fair enough, we'll see what happens in the next decade.
Action RPG Victor Vran is to get an officially licensed Motorhead expansion. The developers Hemimont Games, I'm never saying that again, will take the band's style, history and music and use that to create an entirely new world for the game. Ian Hardingham, what is your ideal band/game combination?
Well, I have an existing thing for this because I'm a huge Scooter fan. And
Yes.
those of you familiar with Scooter's oeuvre know how ridiculous it is, but I also like it. It's the kind of music I like. And I really want to make a Bethesda RPG engine epic that's based around the music of Scooter. I just think the way that renders the terrain, that kind of gameplay, and every so often an important thing happening in the gameplay and one of their brilliant tracks coming over the top. I'm especially thinking of The Endless Story, which is a track that always inspires me to think about game design whenever I listen to it. I love Scooter, and there needs to be a rock epic based on it, and I think games would be the right area for it.
I think Scooter the musical is kind of where this needs to start, and then the game spin-off from that. I think you need horns going off when you collect things.
Yes.
I think you need the man in the ice cream van. You need some cows.
It's all
You
there.
know,
I think it writes itself.
The IP is a rich mine of content. So this is apparently all heavily inspired by and based on Motorhead's history, lyrics, and general attitude. So as far as I know, like Motorhead just kind of just about drinking a lot of whiskey and then kind of grinding your way through an incredibly fast song and then having sex with lots of ladies. That seems to be the entire kind of Motorhead ethos. Maybe I'm not doing justice to Motorhead's rich history with that.
Well, I'm not going to
summation.
know what it is until I've played this mod.
Right, so I mean, I just like if you can, yeah. There's so much wrong with this. It just makes so little sense. I actually slightly despair of this. This kind of reminds me of like the early mid-90s game development where anything would be tied in. There was that Aerosmith game. There was that platformer based on a kind of another hair metal type band. It's just so weird. Like, why are indies doing this?
Yeah, well, I like it as an attempt. I wouldn't even recognise a Motorhead song. I guess I'll watch a video of this and see what they've done, because I could see this being very boring or actually quite fun. It depends how far they go with it. Whenever I see things like this, I'm reminded of the Underworld mod for, I believe, Half-Life, which I always thought was a really fascinating foray into licensed gaming. The studio behind, I think it was Underworld 2, the vampire film.
Yeah.
It is Underworld, what I'm thinking about, isn't it? Yeah.
That's correct, yeah.
And instead of making an entire licensed game, they just paid a very small amount of money for someone to make a licensed mod, and it was a multiplayer mod. It was in the same vein as the other Half-Life mods like Counter-Strike and Natural Selection, that kind of thing, with some interesting class-based stuff. And I always thought that was a really, really great thing to try. And while I don't think this is a great thing to try, I'm kind of still glad it's happening.
I suppose so. It's just confusing. Steam's refund policy continues to have major repercussions as players of allegedly unfinished puzzle game Journey of the Light have been given carte blanche by Valve to claim their money back. The game has also been removed from sale. A poster on the game's Steam forum claims that the game only includes one level, and the level is literally impossible to solve. The developer responded by blaming these issues on a recent update, and then saying that he had health issues, so he can't now fix it. They haven't fixed the game, and they've now closed their Twitter account, apparently. Ian Holdingham, this refund seems like an unambiguously good thing, but is it?
Now, for the purposes of this discussion, I am going to assume that the following is true, that the developer has released a one-level game called Journey of the Light that's supposed to have 8 levels and is marketing it as the hardest puzzle game ever and literally has made the first level impossible to solve. I'm just assuming that. If that turns out not to be the case, then I will retract myself on air, but we're going to go with that for now. So I'm stuck between thinking this is terrible behaviour and really respecting it. In a lot of ways, I think this is an absolutely awesome thing to have done, and I think a lot of the people who've outed them had a fantastic time working out that this is what happened. In terms of Steam offering an unambiguous refund, I think that's pretty good, although they could also have chosen to just refund everyone automatically. So it's not the only option available to them, but having given it some thought, I think it's probably the best thing they could have done.
I'm a bit confused by that. There's two different aspects to this. The first is the game itself. So let's start with that. It doesn't seem like this was a deliberate act of telling people that there are 8 levels and then releasing one that's impossible to finish. Now that would be genuinely amazing. I mean,
that's absolutely what I think it is. Is that not your reading of it?
I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that the kind of dissembling that the developer's done since it kind of came out, I don't think that's kind of coherent with this, unless it's kind of just like low-level trolling, in which case it's not that interesting. It doesn't really feel to me. I think they've made a mistake in terms of like.
They've
really
refused to even show a screenshot of any of the other levels. They've taken part in a lot of discussion where they've tried to defend themselves, but they have refused to even show a screenshot of any other level.
I do understand that. I think that's. Yeah, I haven't read enough of the guy's comments to be completely emphatic on this, but I fairly strongly believe that it's not just a deliberate ploy to create a game with one level that's unfinishable, and then that just seems ludicrous to me. Like, I think if you're going to do that, then you would do it in a much more interesting and funny way than this.
Fair enough. Well, we disagree on that. I think that this is probably an attempt to make money in an unreasonable way, and that he got caught and Steam have taken down the game. If it turns out that it was his update that broke it, then that will change the story, etc. But that'll be interesting to see how that turns out. I have an extremely boring point about this, which is that generally when you have an online distributor such as Steam, they will hold back a certain amount of the money they owe you until the refunds period has passed, just in case there's a sudden wave of refunds. So I'd be slightly interested to see how they plan on paying the creators of this game money, whether it'll be that they'll wait 6 months or a year before releasing the money that the developer will make, because I'm sure that at least half of the people who bought this game will not get a refund.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the other aspect of this to me is that why aren't Valve just falling back on the existing refund policy? Because the existing refund policy allows for you to get a refund for any reasonable reason, after a certain amount of play.
Well, that's the point, because a lot of people will have played this game for 2 hours or more and thus be unable to claim the refund.
Right, so in that case, then the refund policy in general is failing? If it's not accounting for something like this, where a game is basically released in an unfinished state?
I guess so. I mean, the fact is that they have removed it from sale. So they are clearly saying that the game is not okay right now.
Yeah.
And as I said, I think that one thing they could have done would just be to refund all of the money to the customers. I can understand why they wouldn't necessarily do that, and not for purely commercial reasons. A lot of people do appear to have got some enjoyment from this, but I guess it's not. The refund policy is not generally meant to handle a case as egregious as this, I suppose.
I thought that it was less than 2 hours for an automatic refund, and
I see. So they have to get a manual one. I don't know about that. I just know that what they've done for this specifically is to extend the length of automatic refunds.
I mean, I guess this kind of thing is something where you need to step in. So I've been looking a little bit more at some of the developers' posts, and I think obviously it's very possible that this could be a scam. I still don't think that it's necessarily a kind of interesting art project / troll.
Sorry, no, I do think it's a scam. I think it's a scam that I quite like. That has sort of some artistic aspects to it. But no, having
read what he said more, I'm definitely leaning further towards scam than I am towards anything else. And because, as you say, the way to prove that that's not the case is just to show some content from the other levels, and he hasn't done that. So, I mean, and that's like irrespective of many other things. That is completely straightforward to do. If you have made the content already. I think maybe he just hasn't made them, and he's kind of trying to pretend that he has as well. That's kind of quite amazing too. So this is good. I do like the idea of releasing a puzzle game that's so hard that it's almost completely impossible and it needs to be solved by massive community interaction. I mean, I know ARGs have kind of done that, but I don't think anyone's pushed it to the level quite where it's a really integral part of the game design.
Yeah, no, I think it's a nice form, and maybe this will inspire someone to do it properly.
Indeed. At the weekend, Warren Spector, in a post on his blog, posited that games aren't and shouldn't be about choice. He says that rather than focus on the choice, games should be about the revelation of consequences. What is the crucial difference between the choice and the consequences of that choice, Ian Hardingham?
So this is a good article. Obviously, we all love Warren Spector, and I think that the most coherent thing that he's saying is not exactly the subject of the title. He says that the designer should never judge the player's choices, which I think is one of the most insightful things I've heard about game design in quite a long time. The times when I really dislike so-called choice in games are these things where you're either evil or you're good. You know, Mass Effect is an example of this, where you either shoot the man in the face or give him some flowers, and it's often about as arbitrary as that, and it tends to make no particular difference to the game beyond the skin that your character is wearing and sort of changing some dialogue options and everything. And it does. I know a lot of people like all of that, but I have to say I think it's pretty underbaked and not particularly good. But I think that he's just done such a good job of making clear what about that is actually bad, and saying that the game shouldn't judge the player, because for all I think that that's underbaked, the real problem is that whenever I'm forced to make a decision in a game like this, I'm trying to work out what the game wants me to do. I'm trying to game the game. I'm playing a game. That's what I'm doing. So I'm always trying to work out whether I'm going to get something better from doing choice A or choice B. And what Warren Spector is saying is that you shouldn't do that. You should just have interesting things happen no matter what the player does, and have no judgment on it as a designer, which I think is a fantastic point.
So he says designers exist to provide opportunities for players to test behaviours and then see the consequences of those behaviours. And that really does seem to be a design philosophy that he's embraced in particular. It's interesting that he says that's kind of the sole purpose of the game designer, is to allow this experimental sandbox for a player to test behaviours. That's kind of I'm not sure that everyone, or even if I would agree with that statement.
I don't think that's the only thing that every designer should be doing, or rather that the predominant thing that every designer should be doing. I think for a certain subset of games that's a good thing to say, but he's going a bit too far saying that that's what the designer solely exists for.
I definitely agree with both you and him. He says it's annoying, you know, he uses the phrase choosing the devil horns or the angel wings. I absolutely hate that as well. Like, I think he's really calling for a kind of analogue nature of choice and moral ambiguity, you know, and both those two things are important. He talks a lot about narrative in this, and it did make me think, you know, a lot of the time narrative is so beholden to the game design that you can't necessarily make things that are interestingly subtle or kind of analog within the narrative. Like if the game design requires that the player, if they go down a certain route, something bad happens to them, that almost has to be morally indicated in the narrative.
That's interesting. I mean, if I'm trying to imagine myself being the writer and trying to deal with all of these different things that you can do while still trying to maintain a consistent, strong narrative, that sounds like a nightmare. I mean, when I think about Deus Ex, for all of it has a great story. In some ways, the narrative aspects strike me more as when I'm writing systems for an open world game, in which they're saying, okay, what are all of the things that the player could do right now let's make something cool happen with every single one. And that's really the experience of playing Deus Ex. And I think in some ways it treats the narrative a bit more as a tool for making your choices feel really good than trying to have a really strong story throughout. And I probably think that you have to choose which one of those two you're going to do at the start of making the game.
I think also the choices that you offer to the player, that's basically another way of saying game design. Like, how many choices does the player have? How many choices can they make? Because if you reduce the choice to nothing and you amp up the consequences as much as possible, you get Call of Duty. You get a linear experience which has massively sort of overly cinematic, melodramatic consequences for everything the player does. You get press X to pay respect and all that stuff. That's where that comes from. So I'm not sure that... I know he's going for a shift in emphasis away from choice, but he does kind of repeatedly say, choice doesn't matter and choice isn't important.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely being inflammatory here. He's taking a far-out position and definitely causing me to re-examine some of the things that I believe based on it. So it's effective in that way. But yeah, he's definitely sort of over-generalising. Those sort of... I need to play a Telltale game because I haven't yet, and people like them so much, and I don't know if they're sort of like choose your own adventures or if there's more to it than that. So I really need to work out what's going on there. I mean, I often think that people ask for choice too much in games. If you want to have a really awesome immersive storyline, then you're not going to be able to choose every part of that for the majority of games.
Also, you get into a situation where the more choices you're able to make, sort of the less interesting the consequence of each choice can be, just simply by virtue of, kind of multiplication and development time. So there is always this different tension. Yeah, and players always ask for more things that they can do. And I think what he's saying is that it's better to make what happens because of them making a choice more interesting.
Yeah, I think trying to work out how to give players the best of both worlds is everything that we're trying to do in certainly in the last sort of 15 years. You look at Bethesda's approach and how they managed to have their strong narrative combined with massive freedom, then you can see the ways in which it doesn't quite work. So trying to work out how to give people everything, we're still working on that.
According to Rock Paper Shotgun, and in particular Richard Cobbett, weapons in RPGs don't get enough respect. Far too often weapons are discarded for the next shiny thing in order to create a sense of progression, even if obtaining the weapon was a huge part of the story. Ian Hardingham, does the loot-centric mindset of RPGs create ludonarrative dissonance?
I'll get back to you on that one. This is interesting. So we all know from playing Diablo and any number of RPGs that weapons are exciting for about 10 minutes. You get a new one that's really great, it's awesome, and then you level up a couple of times, it's not so awesome anymore, and you're on to the next thing. The article on RPS by Cobbett is about a proposed change to World of Warcraft, where your weapon is like another character. Once you level to a certain level, you get kind of the epic weapon for your class, and then it levels up with you, as it were, and you can choose skills for it, and it basically becomes a bit like a pet, which I think is pretty cool and works. I think that's nice and worth exploring, and basically I do think that RPGs don't respect the weapons enough.
This is, again, very related to what we were just talking about, which is that as much as a writer or as a narrative designer you might want to make the epic sword of Bath that you get out of a magical hill and that talks to you, these games are entirely about the loot concept, which relies on very fast turnover of weapons. So again, it's more about what the designer's doing. This leveling up your weapon thing, that sounds to me also like it compromises the idea of the amazing weapon. Because if you've got, Death Hilt of Magoth and it fires lightning and then it's like level 1, it's not very good when you get it, that completely defeats the point in the story of getting this amazing sword, surely. So this system that they're positing in Warcraft doesn't seem to solve the problem either.
Yeah, as you talk, I kind of agree that maybe this is just sort of not the right thing to be doing, and if you want to do it effectively, you probably just have to have loot for your weapon, which is kind of the same thing, but then it doesn't have as big a range because it can't be a scythe or a katana or etc, etc. So maybe it's a collective thumbs down to this concept.
I don't think this is working for us, and I do feel like I think this is a good article, and pointing out sort of how silly these things are is important. Sometimes designers are able to look at an aspect of game design like this and go, actually, that is silly. Let's make a game based on, maybe you make an action RPG where the weapons are few and far between, and it's only other equipment that you get, and getting a new weapon is kind of the entire point. Maybe you have weapons instead of levels or something like that, and you base it more around that.
Maybe you should play as a weapon and the loot is humans to wield you.
or that, or something nonsensical based on that idea. Could be perfectly fine. Niche historical website Unseen64 was able to obtain an interview with the lead engineer of a previously unknown console. Known as the Taito Wow Wow, the machine was designed to pick up games from satellite broadcasts. The project was scrapped in the early stages because it took too long to download even a small game, in this case a port of 80s classic arcade game Darius, and it added too much to the cost of a receiver box. Ian Hardingham, were these consoles just simply overambitious and before their time, or is there something else we can glean from them?
I was super excited to come across a console that could also have been a character on the Jersey Shore. So yeah. I'm really excited to talk about Potato Wow Wow. I love hearing about, there's something so romantic about consoles as we move forward into the boring future and everything is coming together and that kind of thing, and you don't get these really interesting consoles made by crazy companies as much anymore. It's nice to look back and think about the idea of being a kid in the 80s and downloading games via satellite. Satellites were exciting enough on their own before they were providing games to you. I could see myself being very old and just collecting weird old consoles. I already have an N64DD, and I really would love a Satellaview, which is Nintendo's version of this console, which was about downloading games via satellite and actually worked, but didn't make them any money. So I just love it.
There is some romance to these dead-end technologies, and I was in game the other day and I was just thinking again how, maybe in the future video game stores will be like antique stores and you'll just have this sort of old-style game shop recreated. You'll have all these weird consoles and weird cartridges available that you can buy, and there's so much romance there. Now everything has become digital. People want these romantic weird artifacts, and it is nice to see a new one of these. I've not heard of the Taito Wow Wow before. It's a good name. The games that this had on it seems like there's about 50 million consoles that only have these games on them. It has Darius, Bubble Bobble, and Parasol Stars. It's like it could not be more stereotypical in terms of those kind of weird consoles.
Myself and Visiting the Village mobile gaming correspondent Adam Hunt yesterday were talking about the possibility of, would you ever have a game sold for millions of dollars like you have a piece of art? And would it have to be a physical game? Would it have to be the obscure NES cartridge that was made for a cleaning company or whatever? Or is it possible that we're just going to get so used to buying things digitally that you can have a signed copy of a game on Steam? The idea that the developers could choose to sign a limited number of copies, or that you'd even have a first edition system on Steam, which seems like a place we would go, and then that would become extremely valuable in the future. So when you mentioned the antique shop, it reminded me of that, and how we're at such a transition right now. We don't know what these things will be like in 50 years.
Yeah, digital artifacts could be really a one-off thing that can't be copied and has some copy protection thing or whatever, or signed copies. I think that could be interesting. We already have Steam trading cards, and people seem to have got really into those. They seem to have persisted despite some sort of grumbling and naysaying from old people. So yeah, I think digital scarcity is a weird one. These consoles and obscure games, I really think that good condition sort of classic games and weird stuff are going to go up in value a lot just because of how different they are from anything that exists now. So maybe if you have a Taito Wow Wow, you should put it in a glass case and keep it free of moisture, because you'll be a billionaire in future. ESL have announced the testing regimen they will use for their esports events, following up on a story that we had on the first edition of the rebooted Visiting the Village about Adderall. Apparently the organisation will use a list already created and maintained by the World Anti-Doping Agency, which includes stimulants and steroids, and they will be using saliva tests instead of skin tests, which means that only substances present during the competition can be detected. ESL also pointed out specifically that they are banning the use of cannabis and cannabinoids during the competition. Ian Hardingham, what games are you better at when stoned?
Well, I don't know if I'm better at any games, but I'm certainly less bothered by being bad at games when I'm stoned. Not that I'm ever stoned. But yeah, this is interesting. So there are a couple of interesting aspects of this. The first is that I was a bit bemused that they'd be testing for cannabis, which seems like something that you wouldn't be doing if you wanted to win an online gaming competition. Then I found out that they are using tests which only really detect cannabis within 24 hours. So it's actually really going to be just, are you using it around the competition, and it's not going to be causing you problems if you use it recreationally otherwise, which I think is it would have been a dubious thing to do. And finally, as a side note in this article, it was said that if you have a proper prescription for Adderall, you will be allowed to have it and have taken it during the competition, which I think is interesting. Not what I was expecting when we last talked about this, and could definitely cause some problems with fake prescriptions.
That's true, yes, fake prescriptions, and also I think some players could be seen by others to have an unfair advantage, you know, based on their diagnosis and their prescription. So there's definitely still some controversy there. I mean, I think that they've done the right thing, which is you have to kind of adopt these standardized testing measures. No particular anti-drugs regimen is going to be completely foolproof. We've just had a load more scandals in athletics recently, so, you know, even sports which have been facing this kind of problem for many years still don't have the right solutions. I think that the cannabis thing is interesting. Just the idea of cannabis being performance enhancing for games is somewhat amusing, but as you say, it's about them preserving the integrity of their events. I think esports now are getting to the point where it's the role model issue, the same thing that we've talked about a lot with American sports, that these sports stars are seen to be role models. They'll seem to be socially important. They certainly have a lot of social cachet, social value. People get hundreds of thousands of viewers on Twitch if they appear. They have 1 million Twitter followers and so on. So I think there is a slight sort of societal duty of care idea about making these people behave in an acceptable way, and I wonder if esports is ready for that.
That's true, and I don't know what's going to happen if cannabis is legalised everywhere, which definitely could happen. Well, not everywhere, but you know what I mean. I don't know then if they would have that same standard, because I presume it would still be seen as a mild social bad, like, I guess being completely drunk or something during competition. But right now, the way that the world is right now, it's not really politically correct to completely dislike cannabis, if you know what I mean. It's very much undecided what society at large thinks about it.
Yeah, and also there are issues with medical use of cannabis, which I suppose could come under the same banner as this, you know, prescription Adderall and so on. So it's certainly complicated, but it is interesting to see esports take these first steps through the process of dealing with it. We have a late breaking story now. VG247 are reporting that some Fallout 4 gameplay footage has leaked, and that is the word I've chosen to use here, on Pornhub. That seems like an unfortunate turn of phrase in general. This is entitled Hidden Camera Shows Audience Teased by Big Butt Man in Tights Live. And it's a very wobbly footage of what looks like a gun from Fallout 4. Ian Hardingham, I don't have a question for this topic, and I think that's perfectly apt. Do you have anything to say?
And I don't have an answer. But the only thing about this story, beyond how great it is that you have to go to Pornhub to get your Fallout 4 news, is that this was the only place where the Bethesda takedown notices were ignored. This footage was on YouTube and various other video sites, but they all removed it when they got the cease and desist or whatever from Bethesda. But Pornhub said, no, Bethesda, our freedom of speech is important and we want to show this video. So I really respect Pornhub in this.
Is Pornhub the games industry's WikiLeaks?
It could be that.
And now for something completely different. Interest in racing using quadcopters and other radio-controlled vehicles has exploded in the last year, with a number of FPV, that means first-person view, racing leagues springing up all over the world, such as the Aerial Sports League in the US and Rotorcross in New Zealand. Miami Dolphins owner Stephen Ross has spotted this opportunity and is investing $1 million in setting up the Drone Racing League. Apparently the league will see self-taught pilots face off against those who already have experience flying for the military. Is drone racing going to become a thing, Ian Hardingham?
This is pretty cool. I like this idea, and I could imagine actually watching this. This is a lot like an esport, obviously, only that the racing's going on in real life rather than in the video games. And you can see sort of drones actually crashing and stuff. This sounds really cool. I mean, as we get more electronic stuff that you can control remotely, there's going to be a lot more gamification of random stuff in the real world. And this seems really cool. I mean, I'm sure that it won't become massive. I don't think I would invest that much money in it. But interesting. The real reason I wanted to talk about this is this going to be a serious competitor to esports, Paul Taylor?
I think this is nonsense. I think this is absolute nonsense, because remote control cars already exist, and they're the kind of thing you'd see that on like some really obscure Saturday afternoon ITV program for about 2 minutes about competitive remote control car racing. And if competitive remote control car racing has not taken off, then I don't see how drone racing is going to take off. It just seems like another one of these sort of faddy, weird minor sports things, and I just like I've not watched any drone racing. It just seems catastrophically boring. All air racing is catastrophically boring to start with, and these aren't even planes, they're drones. So it's a no from me.
I have nothing to add to that excellent rant.
And now it's time for Ian's Magic Corner. Take it away, Ian.
Okay, so we are trialling a possible new feature this week where Visiting the Village Magic the Gathering correspondent Tom Richards sends us the Magic the Gathering storyline of the week per him, and sends some notes, and myself and Paul Taylor try to talk about it. So this week, I'm going to try and make this as short as possible, but it's quite a long story. At some kind of Magic the Gathering event, someone found a leaked version of a card that was forthcoming run over in the parking lot. And this card was a land, and something about the number on the card led a lot of people to believe that the forthcoming Magic set, which I believe is called Battle for Zendikar, was going to reprint a bunch of cards that hadn't been printed for, I think, about 8 years. The name of the enemy fetch lands, in case you know about Magic. And then, for a couple of weeks, everyone was pretty sure that this had not only been an intentional leak by Wizards of the Coast, which people still believe, I think, but they were also absolutely convinced that this meant that these cards were being reprinted and would be released soon. But a couple of days ago, the PR guy for Wizards came on and said that this was not true, and that they were printing some different new lands, and that the lands would have some wonderful art or something. Anyway, finally getting to a point. The price of these cards that might have been reprinted, they were pretty expensive. They were around €60 before this whole thing started. They slowly went down to €34 as everyone started to accept they were going to be reprinted, and then went immediately back up to the mid-60s euros as soon as this announcement came out. And it's pretty amazing to see that this kind of really sort of somewhat salacious, very rumory story had such a massive impact on quite an expensive bunch of cards. So do you have anything to say about that, Paul Gilduff-Taylor?
Well, this is really interesting because Tom has some really kind of quite complex theories about what they've done here and kind of why they leaked this card. I mean, the entire thing of the card in the parking lot is sort of one of the most amazing things I've ever heard about Magic the Gathering, just because everything about it has these implications and the community can find out all this information and so on. So, I mean, I think that, like, trying to manipulate the market for cards in a particular way doesn't seem theoretically like something they would do to me. I mean, isn't that sort of very based around what the fans want and what the fans are doing?
I think that's I don't think I agree with Tom that they would have much interest in manipulating the resale value of cards. I think they're just happy whenever cards have a resale value. So he's got a couple of interesting theories. I mean, we won't really know until it comes out. And to be honest, the theories are a little bit too inaccessible to, I think, talk about at length here.
I mean, so the next one is basically about game balance, and he thinks they've kind of worked out that this card wouldn't work with the particular balance they want. And the final one is that they are reserving it for something later on, a release later on, to make it more exciting, basically, and better.
Yeah, actually, his final point is a really interesting one. He obviously thinks that the reprints of these enemy fetch lands are a pretty big deal that are going to get a lot of people very excited. I like the idea that, Wizards have to release 4 sets a year or whatever it is, or 2 full sets or something like that. So they often have to release a lot of sets. So the idea that they might have one that they're really not that excited by creatively and using these fetch lands to kind of make it more exciting, that's something I actually could believe. I mean, I think that it's sort of a reach to a certain extent, but I could see that going through a commercial company's mind.
I still think there's a chance that this was just a prototype and someone dropped it, and then that's it. Like, I still think that none of these theories really have me sold that it was definitely a deliberate ploy by them for some particular manipulative reason.
Yeah, I don't think it's completely clear at all that the run over card in the parking lot was a plant as opposed to an innocent mistake by someone trying to impress his girlfriend.
That's the end of Ian's Magic Corner, and now let's move on to games that were released this week in 2005 thanks to Eurogamer. Ian Hardingham, would you like to give us the rundown?
Yes, the week beginning 12th of August 2005 was an extremely slow week, according to Eurogamer. We only have 2 games on record here. We have Pac-Man Pinball for the Game Boy Advance and The Arcade for the PlayStation 2, which I'm going to go with being a boring set of Spectrum remasters.
Now, I have looked at both Pac-Man Pinball Advance and The Arcade this week, given that we have so few games. And in fact, you are indeed very close to being right. I'm not particularly sure they're Spectrum games, but they're certainly bad old arcade games. And The Arcade it's really embarrassing. Go on YouTube and check out The Arcade and witness just one of the kind of the
or go on Pornhub to check it out.
Right, yeah, of the PlayStation 2. I mean, it's probably too old to be on Pornhub. There's nothing you could leak about it that would meet their criteria. Pac-Man Pinball on the GBA, it looks pretty bad. It doesn't look to stand up to any of the Kirby pinball games or anything like that. It seems like one of those sort of lazy pinball games where they've just kind of put the IP in and it makes the right Pac-Man sounds when you die, and it just seems really terrible. So I'm guessing back in 2005, we were still in the kind of summer caginess about like when you had to release at a particular time to be in the wave of summer games, and then you didn't want
the summer lull.
Yeah, you didn't want to put out your sort of AA game at the wrong time. So
I've just been looking this up because you shamed me with your research. And I was trying to find out whether, I think there were a couple of Game Boy Advance pinball games that had a vibrating rumble pack in the cartridge, which really just continued the theme of completely boggling cartridge editions for Game Boy games.
I'm going to say that I think Pac-Man Pinball is too unambitious to have the rumbling pack. Well, it seems...
You are correct. It was a bog standard, non-rumbling cartridge.
And now it's time to leapfrog into the present day and go for the top 5 UK Steam games. So at number 5 we have Ark Survival Evolved. Number 4 we've got Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Number 3 Grand Theft Auto 5. Number 2 Rocket League. And number 1 is Left 4 Dead 2, which is clocking in at 75% off in a Steam deal. So I'm going to call this a very boring week, Ian Hardingham, in the top 5.
This is a boring week. Barely any movement from last week, and this feature is in serious danger if the charts don't show more interest in the coming weeks. I think it's mildly intriguing that Left 4 Dead 2 still has the power to go to the top of the charts based off a 75% off deal. That surprises me because I know that a lot of money's being pulled in by the number 1 seller on this, and that did mildly surprise me. And Rocket League, I'm still playing it and absolutely loving it.
Yeah, Left 4 Dead 2, that is an interesting one. I've still not ever actually played Left 4 Dead game. I know you hate them almost entirely.
Sorry.
Which is fair enough. But maybe I'll give it a go. It is 75% off. I think there's probably quite a few people like me who just kind of heard all the hype around it and sort of didn't really kind of feel compelled to try it out, but I guess I could give that a go. I'm also playing Rocket League a fair amount. I watched some videos. RPS had a good feature on the best sort of Rocket League videos, and I'm trying to perfect being able to hit the ball with the side of the vehicle and roll so that you can come alongside it. You don't always have to hit it head on. That seems like a major technique that a lot of good people use. And it's weird. It's not a game that I really feel like I want to get better at particularly, or that I want other people to get better at. I just kind of want it to be a sort of silly knockabout game that's a casual multiplayer game forever. But I worry that with the amount that people are playing it, you're going to see very hardcore people online a lot of the time.
I think it's so well designed that even as people get better at it, and I do have to say that I somewhat aspire to get better at it, I think it's still going to be fun in the knockabout way. I think it's got enough randomness to it. I think you're going to see a lot more higher scoring games.
Yes.
The average goals per match will increase as time goes on, I think.
I don't know if it's just because I'm getting match made with better people, but I've definitely seen more people. I think the first thing that people do is they stop chasing the ball and they start positioning themselves properly as team players. And I've definitely seen that more. But that's good for the game overall, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's certainly the first skill that I started fostering.
Yeah, and again, nothing much else of interest here. I've seen some more news items come out about Ark, so perhaps still have to give that a go as our survival game of choice. Maybe we should both play Ark for next week and have a segment on it. Are you ready to make that commitment?
I'm ready to suggest that maybe I would be willing to make that commitment at some point.
Excellent. That's enough of that. Now on to your questions. And the first one is from Luridland on Twitter, and he says, tell us about Frozen Cortex's development. What went right and wrong? Now, that's an entire podcast in itself. I think with Frozen Cortex, the main motivation for it came sort of in the later stages of Frozen Synapse. You came up with the sort of design idea of how you wanted to refine Synapse, and I would say that was something that went right. I think you managed to extract a new game from Frozen Synapse very well.
Yep. I will answer this question in sort of quite specific ways, just on development and not other areas. I think the iteration process of getting the core game mode took too long, but I'm very happy with the result, so that's fine. I spent too long working on the 3D outcomes, which didn't end up being important enough to warrant how much time we spent on them. I'm very happy with how the game looks, even though that was a little bit of a torturous process itself. To be honest, Frozen Cortex just took too long to make. I'm very happy with the game as it's turned out, but it was just over 3 years was way too long, and we're not going to take that long making games again for a while. And after FS came out, I probably was quite arrogant and thought I didn't have as much to learn about making games, but I learned as much while making Frozen Cortex as I did while making Frozen Synapse or Determinants.
Yeah, I think I basically agree with everything there. I think some of the stuff that went wrong was just around kind of clarifying what the most important things to work on were, as you said, with the kind of 3D outcomes. I think obviously we had some issues with the concept and people thinking it was a sports game, but that was probably the biggest learning experience for me of anything we've done, just in terms of how you translate what's good about the game into something you can present to other people. That was really actually completely fascinating, so I'm kind of glad we went through that, and I think we kind of made the best of that at the end. But yeah, the game took too long to make, it was too expensive to make, and those were kind of the major things with it. But I've been kind of looking at it again recently and thinking about it, and I'm very happy with it as a game. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, I still absolutely plan on redoing the tutorial before we next have a big event with it. I still feel that enough people have told me that they think that the core mechanics of the game are not explained explicitly enough that I want to take another crack at doing that.
Alrighty, so moving on to Jim Didrikson's question, and it's very similar, but it's to do with sort of when we started, and it's, what did you do when starting out that taught you the most about making games? And I'll let you go for this one first.
I mean, I learned by doing, so the things that taught me the most were just doing. I suppose making your initial prototype and knocking my head against the wall for weeks just to get the very initial things working taught me the most, but I can't really think of any specific thing. I've been making games professionally full-time for 12 years now, and I was making games in my spare time for 8 years before that, and I just think I just learned by doing.
Yeah, I mean, very similar for me. I think actually probably one of the things that taught me the most was when we were working on Determinants, which was our first game. It was probably doing some of the actual hands-on development stuff, like writing the story that goes in the single-player bit, and doing things like I did some texturing on one of the levels, and then obviously I kind of worked on the sound. So it was doing the hands-on specific development things actually taught me a lot about how games are made and how difficult it is to change things. I think that was the thing with Determinants that really struck me, was like you can't just have an idea and sort of immediately see it in the game. Like changing something involves all of these sort of nested consequences for other things and is technically difficult. So you have to kind of pick and choose when you change stuff and how you change it. And I think that's something that if you've never developed a game before, you don't really understand that that's difficult. So you kind of think, why don't the developers just do X, Y, and Z? And it's so obvious to you as a player. But the reason is that changing stuff is difficult and has negative externalities. So there you go.
I agree with that.
And finally, our final question from Dali Sam is, do souls exist? And the answer is no. So thanks very much for listening to Visiting the Village. I've been Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and he's been Ian Harningham, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.